have we got next? Ah, yes, it looks like Jimmy Jones is in for a surprise, because this story is called Maisie Comes to Stay. Ruth Jones had a sister, and her name was Rona Jenkins. She was a very special sister, because both Ruth and Rona were twins. They had been born almost at the same time, but Rona was older by just 20 minutes. You would think that as twins they would look very much like each other, but they didn't. Whilst Ruth had dark brown hair that was straight and almost shone in the sun, Rona's hair was the colour of poppies and was very wavy, curly almost. Rona's daughter, Maisie, also had red curly hair and blue eyes. Of course, Jimmy didn't pay much attention to this sort of thing. He liked his cousin Maisie, but their interests were very different. Whilst Jimmy liked to play with cars, iPads, his football, the tree house, Lego and his bike, Maisie was more interested in her dolls, dressing up, pretending to be a good cook, reading books about fairies, and playing in her Wendy house. There was one other thing, and it bothered Jimmy. Although Maisie was also 6 years old, she had been born a few months before Jimmy, and because she was older than he, it made her feel more important. So whenever she was with Jimmy, she always liked to tell him what to do. Jimmy did like her, but he did think she was a bit bossy. One day Ruth said to Jimmy, "Jimmy, I've got a surprise for you. Maisie is going to come and stay with us for a few days. We've got to look after her whilst Auntie Rona goes into hospital to have a baby." Jimmy wasn't entirely sure this was going to be a good thing. He didn't mind if Maisie came to visit for a day, but the idea that she would stay for a few days, and even a week, worried him. "Will she have to sleep in my bed?" He imagined having to give up his bed and being forced to sleep on the floor. "No, silly," Ruth laughed. "We'll put her in the guest room." Then Jimmy thought he would have to play with her all the time, and that would mean looking after her dollies and not seeing Roger. "Look, Jimmy," Ruth encouraged, "just do what you normally do. All I ask is that you be very kind to Maisie, because she will be without her mummy and daddy, and it wouldn't be nice if she felt lonely or unwelcome. Anyway, she can help me in the kitchen, and she likes looking after Freddie. She thinks he is a big doll, and likes to imagine she is his mummy." Jimmy didn't think this would work. Although Freddie was still very small, he did like to do things his own way, like collecting stones in the garden, digging up worms, and playing with his carpentry toys. These were not the sort of things that would appeal to Maisie. One Sunday afternoon, a silver BMW car drew up outside the doctor's house. A tall man got out of the car and opened the rear door. He bent down and stretched over to the young girl in the child's chair, released her seatbelt, and said in a cheery voice, "Okay, Maisie, let's see what Jimmy and Freddie are up to." The tall man was Maisie's father, and his name was Keith. Maisie struggled out of her seat. It wasn't easy because she had a doll under each arm, and she was trying to pick up another one. Then she started to look for her favourite book, which had pictures of lots of fairies in it. "Come on, Maisie!" Keith was getting impatient. He had lots to do and needed to get back to Rona as soon as possible. "We haven't got all day. Just leave those things and I'll bring them in a minute." Maisie jumped out of the car and into the arms of Ruth, who had been waiting. She wanted to make sure Ruth had a big welcome. Jimmy and Freddie stood in the doorway, but instead of looking at Maisie, they were more interested in the silver BMW. It looked like a very fast car and much more exciting than the old Land Rover car that their father Philip used. They rather hoped they would get a ride in it, but were disappointed when, after getting Maisie's dolls and bags out of the car and giving Maisie a quick kiss, he jumped back into the BMW and sped off home so that he could take Rona to the hospital. Instead of being quiet and sad because she was no longer with her mother or father, Maisie looked very excited. She loved sleepovers, and this was going to be a very long one. She always liked to come to the doctor's house because it had a very big garden and was in the countryside where there were lots of animals and birds. Her house was 20 kilometres away and in the centre of a big town where there were no trees and all the gardens were very small. Coming to see Ruth, Jimmy and Freddie was just like going on holiday. "Okay, Maisie, let's go and see your room," Ruth said to Maisie, giving her another hug. Picking up Maisie's bags, Ruth climbed the stairs, followed by Maisie, who was trying desperately to get past her. She couldn't wait to see what her room was going to be like. "It's there on the right." Ruth pointed to a room at the end of the first floor landing. Maisie rushed past her to open the door. It was a very nice room that looked out onto the garden. She could see trees and fields for as far as the eye could see. The room had all the things a young girl would need. A dressing table with a big mirror, an armchair, lots of cupboards to put her clothes in, and 2 single beds. The thought of having 2 single beds was brilliant. Maisie would sleep in one, whilst all her dolls could be put in the other one. It didn't take long for Maisie to settle in. At first, she had so many of her own things to do that she didn't have time to play with Jimmy. Then there was supper and a bit of television, and it was time for a bath, a story from Ruth, and into bed. Jimmy was quite happy about this because it meant he could do what he wanted to do without anyone interfering. However, it would all be very different in the morning. Next day, Maisie was up very early because she had lots of plans. She wanted to go in the garden. She wanted to go and see the cows in one of Farmer Nicholson's fields. She wanted to see if there was a fairy ring under the trees. And she wanted to explore the whole of the doctor's house. Now, although Maisie had been to the doctor's house a number of times before, she had never been in all its rooms. That's because there were a lot of them, so she did a lot of investigating on her own. Maisie liked all the rooms, but the one she liked best was not really a room at all. It was the cupboard under the stairs. It was where Ruth kept her vacuum cleaner, brooms, brushes, shopping bags, the family shoes, and lots of other things besides. "This is going to be our new home, Jimmy," she suddenly announced to the surprised boy. "That's not a home. That's the broom cupboard," Jimmy insisted. "It's only pretend," Maisie soothed. "And why did you say it's our home? I'm not going to live in there." Jimmy was adamant. "Oh, yes, you are," Maisie confirmed, "because when we get married, we've got to have somewhere to stay." Jimmy was astounded and immediately ran to Ruth. "Mum," he blurted, "Ruth says she's going to marry me, and I've got to go and live with her under the stairs. I'm not going to do it." Ruth laughed. "Ha ha! It's only a game, Jimmy. It's not real. After a while, Maisie will get bored and want to do something different. Anyway, if I clear out the cupboard, there'll be plenty of space in there. Maisie can imagine it's her home, and you can imagine it's a camp or a special den. Here, I'll lend you my radio, and you can play music in there." The idea of a den and a radio didn't seem such a bad idea to Jimmy, so he decided he would play Maisie's game. But first the cupboard had to be emptied. Ruth, Maisie and Jimmy all helped to take everything out and store it in the corner of the utility room. Then Ruth found some cushions, 2 stools, some blankets, and then she got the radio. Maisie thought it was fantastic, especially as the cupboard had a proper light in it. Jimmy began to think it might be fun after all. But then he had another surprise. "We've got to dress up," Maisie informed. "Why?" asked Jimmy, wondering what Maisie had in mind. "Because we're going to get married, silly." Maisie had thought it quite obvious and couldn't understand why she had to explain everything to Jimmy. "We'll need some special clothes," she added, and ran off to find Ruth. "Can we have some special clothes for our wedding?" she asked Ruth. who was rather busy cleaning some mud off Freddie's trousers. He had been in the garden digging again. Ruth agreed, saying, "Well, let's have a look. You will need something white like a wedding dress." "And Jimmy needs to look very smart as well," Maisie insisted. Her mind was buzzing with all the things you had to do when you got married. Jimmy, on the other hand, just wished he was somewhere else and thought about escaping to the treehouse. Ruth found a long and pretty white blouse which, when put on Maisie, just looked like a dress. Jimmy had one smart shirt for special occasions and, after a struggle saying he didn't want it, finally agreed to put it on over his T-shirt. Then, so as he would look extra special, Ruth found one of his father's ties. It was red and matched the colour of Maisie's hair. It was also rather large and reached all the way down to Jimmy's legs. "Well, you two really do look fine," Ruth said appreciatively after she had done a final bit of arranging, straightening Jimmy's tie and giving Maisie a little necklace to wear. "Now, let's get on with the wedding, and then I've got to make supper." They all went downstairs into the lounge. Ruth put on some music, took some flowers out of a vase for Maisie to hold, and then told both children to stand in front of her and to hold hands. Then, looking very serious, she said, "I, Ruth Jones, pronounce you, Jimmy Jones and Maisie Jenkins, man and wife. Jimmy, you may now kiss the bride." Jimmy looked startled. The idea of having to kiss Maisie came as quite a shock. "Why have I got to kiss Maisie?" he protested. "Because that's what they do in weddings," Maisie explained, leaning forward with eyes closed, ready to kiss her new husband on the lips. "No way!" Jimmy almost shouted, but it was too late. Maisie grabbed him and gave him a firm kiss on the lips. "Yuck!" Jimmy reacted, rubbing his lips as hard as he could to erase the kiss. Maisie thought it was very funny. "Don't complain, I think you really liked it," she teased. "No, I didn't!" Jimmy yelled, turned round and ran upstairs. Jimmy stayed in his room for some time, sulking, and it was only when he started to get hungry that he decided to go downstairs again. Maisie was still in her wedding dress, but Jimmy had taken off his special shirt and his father's tie. "Maisie has asked if she can have her supper in her new home under the stairs," Ruth said to Jimmy. "I've put a tiny side table in there to put your plates on." Jimmy realized immediately he was expected to have his supper with Maisie in their cupboard. He was still a bit annoyed about the kiss, but agreed because it could be fun using the cupboard as a den with music, food, and large comfortable cushions. In fact, by the time Ruth knocked on the cupboard door, carrying their puddings, Jimmy was beginning to have quite a nice time. Next day, it was Monday. Ruth had to become Nurse Jones again and go to work in the surgery. "Right," she said to Jimmy and Maisie, "you've got plenty of things you can do, and so I want you to play nicely together. I'm going to take Freddie with me, but if you need anything, just come round and tell me." Jimmy was rather hoping Maisie would go and play with him in the treehouse, but Maisie had other ideas. She was still pretending to be married, and if you were a married lady, she reasoned, you had to do lots of cooking. "I'm going to make biscuits," she suddenly declared to Jimmy, "and you're going to help me." Jimmy quite liked the thought that Maisie would make him some biscuits. He was always asking for biscuits because he never seemed to stop being hungry. He liked digestive biscuits, malt biscuits, bourbon biscuits, shortbread biscuits, chocolate biscuits, wafer biscuits, and, best of all, jammy dodgers. "Right," said Maisie, taking charge and sounding very much like Jimmy's teacher at school. "I want you to tell me where all the things are." "What things?" Jimmy asked, rather puzzled. Maisie rolled her eyes, trying to look exasperated. "Eggs, flour, butter, sugar," she said. She knew very well what you needed to make biscuits, because she had seen her mother Rona do it lots of times. Jimmy looked in all the kitchen cupboards with help from Maisie. Very soon Maisie had all the things she needed, including a spoon, a cooking tray, a spatula knife, and a few other things besides, just in case they were needed. Then both children dragged 2 chairs from the lounge because they needed something to stand on so they could reach the kitchen surface and get to work. "Where's the food mixer?" Maisie asked, looking around the kitchen. She soon saw it and repositioned her chair in front of it. Then she got up on the chair, got all her things together, and started telling Jimmy what to do. "Pass me the flour, please." Jimmy passed her the bag of flour. Now, instead of taking just a little bit out of it and measuring it on a pair of scales, she emptied the whole bag into the food mixer. "Isn't that rather a lot?" Jimmy asked, wondering if Maisie knew what she was doing. "Yes, it's just right," she assured. Then she poured almost all of a bag of sugar in, and a whole block of butter. Fortunately, the children had only found 4 eggs, and now Maisie put these in as well. "Mum always breaks the eggs first," Jimmy informed. "You've got to take them out of the shells." "Oh, silly me," Maisie replied, looking rather embarrassed. She then stuck her hand into the mixer and pulled out the eggs, now covered in flour and butter. It was beginning to get a bit messy. "How are we going to break them?" Jimmy asked, wondering what to do with the eggs. Maisie wasn't sure. "I think we just bash them," she said. Then, taking a heavy spoon, she hit each egg very hard. Suddenly, there were tiny pieces of cracked shells and sticky egg all over the place. "That doesn't look right to me," Jimmy commented. He was starting to get worried about what his mother would say, but Maisie simply scooped up the gooey mess and put it in the food mixer. "It'll be all right," Maisie said, trying to look confident. Then she leaned across to press the switch on the food mixer. There was a sudden whirring and sludgy sound, and then a huge cloud of white flour shot out of the food mixer to cover the kitchen surface and the floor. Maisie had forgotten to put the lid on the food mixer. "Oh dear," she said, reaching to turn it off, but her fingers were sticky and they slipped. The mixer kept whirring and puffing flour into the air so that it now covered both children. It was fortunate that at that very moment Ruth came into the kitchen. "What on earth are you 2 doing?" she screamed, whilst running over to turn off the food mixer. Maisie knew she had done wrong and started to cry. Jimmy was also very worried in case his mother blamed him for all the mess. That would have been very unfair, because none of it had been his idea. Seeing that Maisie was now sobbing and very distressed, she decided not to get angry. She took hold of Maisie and gave her a cuddle. "Now, Maisie, what on earth were you trying to do?" she asked, trying to calm the little girl. "Biscuits," was all that Maisie could say between sobs. "Well, you were a very good girl trying to do some cooking for us, but I will tell you what worries me most. You were going to use the oven, weren't you?" "Yes," Maisie admitted. She knew that that was probably wrong as well. "Well, I'm so glad you didn't," Ruth said, giving Maisie a little kiss on her cheek. "Ovens are very dangerous if you don't know how to use them. Little children can get horribly burnt. Promise me you'll never try and do that." Maisie agreed. She knew that getting burnt could hurt a lot. "Okay, Maisie. Now, dry your tears, because later on after lunch I have to go to the post office in the village. I suggest we all go for a walk there." When lunch came, the children asked to have ham sandwiches. Ruth made them and added some extra taste and goodness by putting lettuce leaves, slices of tomato, and small blobs of mayonnaise in them. They were very good, and it made everyone forget the big disaster they had had with the biscuit making. Both children helped with the washing up, and then Ruth got everyone ready to go out. Freddie could have walked all the way to the village, but Ruth was always worried about him straying into the road, so she put him in his wheelchair. Freddie hated this and struggled because he wanted to be like the big children and walk with them. Eventually, he was persuaded when Ruth gave him one of his toy cars to play with. "Please, can I push, Freddie?" Maisie asked. "Of course you can, Ruth, but please try to go nice and straight and not into the road." Maisie was used to pushing a pram because she had a toy one at home for her dolls. This one was a bit heavy and sometimes swerved, but Maisie did quite well with a bit of help from Ruth. When they arrived in the village, Ruth started seeing lots of people she knew, and almost all stopped to say hello. On each occasion, Ruth introduced them to Maisie, saying, "This is my niece Maisie. She's staying with us whilst my sister has a new baby." Maisie would then interrupt and inform, "I've just got married, and Jimmy is my new husband." Then she would point at Freddie to add with a motherly smile, "Freddie here is our new baby." Of course, people were enchanted to hear Maisie's make-believe, but Freddie was horrified. "I'm not her husband," he would strongly insist. "And Freddie is not my baby, he's my brother." Everyone laughed, but not Jimmy. He thought it was very serious. So now, if he saw one of his mother's friends approaching, he would race up to them before Maisie could get to them and claim, "I am not married to Maisie, she is my cousin." Naturally, this left people feeling very confused, but one old gentleman was kind enough to say, "I quite understand, Jimmy. You're much, much too young to be married, although I have to say your little friend with the red hair is very pretty." For the next 2 days, Maisie and Jimmy played together, but doing their own things. Jimmy with his cars and Lego, and Maisie with her dolls and fairy tale books. Even when they were in the treehouse, they had different ideas. Jimmy imagined he was in the jungle, whilst Maisie dreamed of being in a castle about to be rescued by a handsome prince. There was one thing they did share. Just before going to bed, they would tell each other stories. One night, Maisie's story was about Cinderella. Jimmy knew about Cinderella, so wasn't very interested. His story was very different. It was a very frightening story that Roger had once told Jimmy, and it was called Dracula. Maisie was lying in her bed, clutching her favourite doll, whilst Jimmy sat by her side, telling her about the most horrible person in the world. Dracula was a monster man who would sleep in the day and then wake in the middle of the night. Suddenly his body would itch and wrinkle and shrink, changing shape until it took the form of a vampire bat. 2 sharp-pointed teeth would appear on the sides of his mouth as Dracula stretched his wings, flapping them fiercely before flying out of his dark dungeon to find a victim. His food was human blood. As people slept, he would creep up on them, biting his teeth into their necks to drink their blood before flying away, leaving them lifeless. Jimmy said there were only 2 things you could do to protect yourself from Dracula. You needed to draw a chalk circle around your bed and hang garlic in your room. That way, Dracula could not enter the chalk circle, and he hated the smell of garlic. Maisie listened to the whole story, and as she did, she sank further and further under her duvet until she was so frightened she totally disappeared from view. Jimmy thought Dracula was a very good story, but then was surprised when Maisie suddenly leapt out of bed to find Ruth. "I need chalk and lots of garlic," she almost screamed at Ruth. "Whatever is the matter?" Ruth asked. tightly holding the terrified girl.
Jimmy's been telling me about Dracula, and I don't want Dracula to get me,
Maisie cried. Oh, Jimmy, he is such a naughty boy, Ruth complained. Now, don't worry, Maisie. There's certainly no such thing as Dracula. Now, go back to bed and forget all about it. It was no use. Maisie would not go to bed until Ruth gave her some chalk or garlic. Ruth gave in. There wasn't any chalk, but she did have some garlic in the kitchen, so she got some and gave it to Maisie. Maisie climbed the stairs and carefully opened her bedroom door. Jimmy had switched the light off. Now Maisie switched it back on again. Then she went over to look in the bedroom wardrobe and behind the curtains to make sure Dracula wasn't there. She checked the window so that it was locked tight and then began to put the garlic around the room. Finally, she switched off the light and hopped into bed, snuggling as far down under her duvet as possible. It was very quiet, but then she began to hear a ghostly noise that started as a whisper and then got louder and louder. Maisie screamed and jumped out of bed. As her foot hit the ground, it was immediately grabbed by a hand from under the bed. Maisie pulled herself free and ran for the door. Ruth and Philip came running up the stairs. Maisie leapt into Ruth's arms. "Dracula is in my room!" Maisie shrieked. Leaving Philip to look after Maisie, Ruth went into Maisie's room where she found Jimmy rolling about on her bed, laughing so much he almost wanted to do a wee-wee. Jimmy had been hiding under Maisie's bed when she had come back with the garlic. Ruth was very cross with Jimmy. "Look, Maisie," she said, hoping to calm Maisie. "It's only Jimmy. He was trying to give you a fright." Then she turned to Jimmy. "That was very cruel of you," she said, wagging her finger at him.
"But, Mum, she was telling everyone we were married and that Freddie was our baby, and it's not true. I don't want all my friends to know about it, or they'll all laugh at me," Jimmy explained, trying to defend himself. "Well, that may be true," Ruth replied, "but everyone knew it was just a game Maisie was playing, and that's no reason to make her unhappy. Now, apologize to Maisie and say you won't do it again." Jimmy was beginning to feel sorry for Maisie, and rather guilty. He didn't like seeing her cry with all those tears in her eyes, so he said he would never frighten her again. Maisie felt much better now, but refused to go back into her bed. Instead, she went into Ruth's and Philip's bedroom and felt much safer cuddled up next to them. On Wednesday evening, Ruth had a telephone call from Keith. He asked to talk to Maisie, and this is what he said. "Hello, darling, I've got some lovely news for you. You've got a new baby sister, and her name is Stella. She's so looking forward to seeing you. After I collect Mummy from the hospital and bring her home, I'm going to come and get you. What a happy, happy family we're going to be." Maisie was thrilled. She always hoped she would have a sister, because then they would both be able to play with dolls, have special tea parties, and play princes and princesses. Maisie now felt very important indeed, because she would be the big sister, looking after little Stella and teaching her all the things she needed to do and to know. Maisie was so excited. Just before lunch the next day, Keith arrived in his BMW car. Maisie had been waiting for him, ready with her packed bags for what seemed ages. She so wanted to see her little sister and gave a big whoop when she saw her father. There were kisses all round, even from Jimmy, as the Jones family said goodbye to Maisie. She was smiling and waving frantically from the back seat of Keith's car as they sped off home. The next few days seemed rather strange and empty without Maisie. At least, that's what Jimmy felt.
He missed his cousin and only now realized how much he liked her and what fun she could be. Maybe, he thought to himself, when baby Stella is big enough, she and Maisie can come and stay with me in my tree house.